Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into ancient Greece again, but not into battlefields filled with bronze shields, not into temples echoing with prayers, and not into grand debates where philosophers argue for 3 hours about whether a chair truly exists. Tonight we're entering something much quieter, much stranger. Tonight, you are a record keeper, a young man whose entire future depends on remembering things other people forgot 5 minutes ago. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before sunrise, not because you are particularly disciplined or inspired, but because ancient Greece has developed a very impressive system where responsibility arrives before consciousness does. Somewhere nearby, sandals scrape against stone floors. A servant yawns loudly enough to suggest he wants witnesses. Birds argue outside the windows as though they have urgent political opinions. The city is already beginning to breathe. You sit up slowly, careful not to move too quickly. Stone rooms have a way of reminding people that comfort remains a temporary arrangement. The morning air still carries traces of cold from the night. You rub your eyes and stare at the ceiling for a moment, experiencing the universal human tradition of wondering whether getting out of bed is truly necessary. Unfortunately, it is. Because unlike philosophers, scribes and record keepers do not survive by asking questions. They survive by remembering answers. You wash your face with cool water from a clay basin, immediately regrettable. Ancient people seem deeply committed to beginning every day with mild suffering. You dry your face with linen and dress in simple clothes, nothing elegant, nothing poor enough to look careless either. You've learned something important here. Clothing is language. People read fabric the way they read faces. Too refined and others think you're ambitious. Too plain and others think you are unimportant. Balance matters. Everything in Greece eventually becomes about balance. The city outside slowly wakes around you. Somewhere bread is baking. Somewhere someone is already shouting at someone else. Somewhere a merchant is preparing for a full day of confidently exaggerating the quality of olives. Ordinary life unfolds in careful layers. You step outside carrying wax tablets and writing tools tucked beneath your arm. They feel heavier than they should. Not physically, mentally, because names live there. Agreements live there. Taxes live there. Promises live there. Entire futures sometimes live there. People trust memory less than they trust written marks scratched into wax. And that creates an unusual kind of power. Not loud power, not military power, quiet power, invisible power. The kind sitting beside you while nobody notices. As you walk through narrow streets, people pass around you without much attention. Citizens discussing business, labourers carrying tools, children chasing each other through spaces adults insist are inappropriate for running. Nobody looks twice at you. You are ordinary, useful, present without being important. And strangely enough, you prefer it that way. Because attention in ancient Greece often arrives carrying responsibilities behind it. Better to walk quietly, better to observe, better to listen. You've already learned that information moves through cities like wind through trees. It appears unexpectedly. It changes direction constantly. And people reveal more than they realize whenever they assume no one important is listening. Luckily, nobody ever considers the quiet man carrying writing tablets important, which means they talk freely. They complain freely. They reveal secrets freely. And by the time morning sunlight reaches across the city walls, you've already started understanding something strange about your life. You're surrounded by voices every day, thousands of them. Arguments, laughter, rumors, promises, lies, and yet your job isn't speaking. Your job is remembering what everyone else forgot they said. You've now reached the middle of your morning, and ancient Greece has begun performing one of its favourite activities, pretending everything is organised while secretly operating through a system of controlled confusion. You arrive at the administrative courtyard where your work happens, and immediately you're greeted by the familiar sight of people standing around with the focused expressions of men who look extremely busy while accomplishing almost nothing. Citizens move in clusters beneath stone columns, holding scrolls, gesturing dramatically, speaking with the kind of confidence that only appears when nobody actually knows what's happening. You walk carefully through the crowd because you have learned another important lesson about public spaces. The loudest person in the room usually understands the least. Somewhere to your left, two merchants are arguing about grain prices. Somewhere to your right, an elderly man is explaining to anyone willing to listen that things were significantly better 20 years ago, which is fascinating because records suggest he was complaining about exactly the same things 20 years ago. Ancient civilizations, you realise, may have invented philosophy, mathematics and democracy, but they also invented people insisting the world has recently become terrible. Some traditions survive forever. You move toward your corner beneath the shaded portico where wax tablets wait in small stacks beside wooden shelves lined with documents. It isn't glamorous work. Nobody writes poetry about record keepers. Nobody builds statues celebrating the man who correctly counted olive shipments 3 summers ago. But cities quietly depend on people like you, because memory is unreliable. Human beings forget constantly. They forget promises, prices, agreements, names, debts, responsibilities, and occasionally entire conversations they initiated themselves. You sit down and begin organising tablets from yesterday's proceedings, grain deliveries, tax reports, land disputes, payment records, lists of names attached to obligations everyone was enthusiastic about making and considerably less enthusiastic about fulfilling. The fascinating thing about records is that they reveal people more honestly than faces do. Faces lie comfortably, faces smile, faces perform. Records simply sit there patiently waiting to expose someone later. You begin sorting through details while citizens arrive one after another, carrying problems they suddenly believe deserve immediate attention. One man insists his neighbour's goats crossed onto his land. Another claims someone promised him payment that mysteriously never arrived. Another argues that boundaries between properties seem suspiciously different than they were last month. You write carefully while maintaining an expression of calm neutrality, because people become deeply uncomfortable when the person recording their complaints appears amused. Inside, however, you occasionally feel entertained. Human beings are remarkably consistent. Different clothes, different centuries, same arguments, same frustrations, same certainty that everyone else's behaviour is unreasonable, while their own actions remain perfectly understandable. A wealthy merchant approaches your table and places a hand on your shoulder with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to doors opening automatically around him. He smiles warmly and asks whether certain documents concerning shipping arrangements might perhaps disappear accidentally. Not permanently, of course, temporarily. Just long enough for confusion to improve circumstances for everyone involved, especially him. You look at him politely. He looks at you politely. For a moment, both of you participate in a silent conversation happening underneath actual words. He wants flexibility. You want employment. Ancient societies often function through these delicate negotiations between principle and practicality. Eventually you smile gently and explain that wax tablets unfortunately possess excellent memories. He stares at you briefly before laughing loudly enough to suggest he respects honesty, though not loudly enough for anyone to believe it completely. He leaves. Midday sunlight slowly shifts across stone floors while shadows retreat beneath columns. Hours pass, measured less by clocks and more by movement around you. Farmers arrive carrying dust on their sandals. Officials appear carrying urgency on their faces. Messengers move through crowds with expressions suggesting civilization itself depends entirely on where they are walking. You continue writing, listening, recording, existing in that strange invisible space where everyone notices your usefulness, but almost nobody notices you. And as you work, another realization quietly settles into your mind. People think power belongs to generals, politicians, wealthy merchants, and philosophers standing dramatically in public squares. But maybe power also belongs to quieter things. Maybe power belongs to memory. Maybe power belongs to names written carefully into wax. Maybe power belongs to the person sitting silently while everyone else keeps talking. The afternoon arrives slowly, stretching itself across the city with the lazy confidence of something that knows nobody can stop it. By now, the bright energy of morning has softened. The crowds have changed. Merchants speak a little slower. Citizens argue with slightly less enthusiasm. Even the city itself feels warmer, heavier, as though sunlight has settled onto rooftops and decided it has no intention of leaving anytime soon. You remain beneath. The stone portico surrounded by wax tablets, records, names, agreements, and all the quiet little details that somehow keep entire communities from collapsing into complete confusion. You've discovered something interesting over the months you've worked here. Morning brings certainty. People arrive with strong voices and strong opinions. They know exactly who wronged them, exactly what happened, exactly why justice should immediately agree with them. But afternoon does something strange to certainty. Heat melts confidence. Time weakens anger. Stories begin changing around the edges. A man who arrived earlier furious about missing money now returns, speaking more carefully, suddenly remembering that perhaps certain details were slightly different than originally described. Another, who loudly swore yesterday that witnesses would support his claim, now quietly explains that witnesses unfortunately seem difficult to locate. Truth, you've noticed, behaves strangely around people. It bends, it stretches, it adjusts itself to circumstances with surprising flexibility. Records do not. That is why people simultaneously respect and fear them. You continue working while voices drift around you like smoke. Nearby, two officials discuss taxes while pretending not to complain. One keeps repeating that citizens should happily contribute for the good of the city. The other keeps making sounds suggesting he has personally met citizens before and knows exactly how unrealistic that idea is. Across the courtyard, a young messenger stands impatiently waiting for documents, while shifting his weight every few seconds, as if standing still might somehow cause permanent injury. Watching him reminds you of yourself when you first arrived here. Back then, everything felt important. Every conversation seemed filled with hidden meaning. Every official looked powerful. Every task felt connected to grand invisible systems governing the world. Now you understand something different. Most systems survive not because people are extraordinary, but because enough ordinary people continue doing ordinary things every day without receiving applause for it. Cities survive because someone counts grain correctly, because someone remembers agreements, because someone notices mistakes before they become disasters. Not glamorous work, necessary work. The realization feels strangely comforting. Your thoughts are interrupted when an older man approaches carrying several tablets beneath one arm. You recognize him immediately. He has worked around these records longer than you have, longer than many people here. His face carries that particular expression older workers develop after spending years watching young men arrive full of certainty and leave carrying confusion instead. He places the tablets beside you without speaking immediately. You notice him studying the courtyard quietly. Finally, he asks whether you've started noticing patterns yet. The question catches you off guard. Patterns in what exactly? He smiles faintly, the kind of smile suggesting someone already knows the answer before asking the question. In people, he says simply. You glance around uncertainly. He gestures toward the crowds moving through sunlight and shadow. Watch long enough, he says, and everyone repeats themselves. Different names, different faces, same mistakes. Men promise more than they possess. Neighbours argue over land. Merchants insist they are honest. Politicians insist they are different. Lovers make impossible promises. Friends create enemies. Enemies become friends whenever money appears. Human beings change clothes faster than they change behaviour. You listen quietly while pretending to continue organising tablets. But his words settle somewhere in your thoughts, because the longer you work here, the harder it becomes to ignore certain similarities. The wealthy complain about losing money while poor men complain about never having enough to lose in the first place. Powerful people fear losing influence. Ordinary people fear being forgotten entirely. Everyone worries. Everyone wants security. Everyone believes their problems deserve special attention. Looking around suddenly feels different now. The courtyard no longer resembles random movement. It resembles repetition. A giant living pattern continuously rebuilding itself. A strange human machine powered entirely by hope, fear, pride, and confusion. Hours continue passing. Shadows lengthen across stone floors. Sunlight shifts farther west, turning walls golden for brief moments before sliding away again. Slowly the crowds begin thinning. Citizens collect belongings and return toward homes. Officials disappear into side chambers. Voices fade one after another until silence gradually replaces them. You begin gathering tablets together and arranging them carefully onto shelves. Names beside numbers, agreements beside dates, tiny pieces of ordinary life preserved against forgetting. and while your hands continue moving, automatically another thought arrives quietly beside you. Perhaps memory itself isn't really about the past. Maybe memory exists because human beings keep making the same journeys repeatedly. Maybe writing things down isn't about preserving information at all. Maybe it's about leaving messages for people who haven't realised yet that they're walking familiar roads. You stop for a moment and look across the nearly empty courtyard. Evening light now stretches long shadows over stone paths where hundreds of feet walked earlier today. Tomorrow they'll return. Different arguments, different voices, same patterns, same hopes, same worries, same human heart wearing different faces, and for reasons you cannot completely explain, the thought doesn't make you sad. It makes you feel strangely less alone. The evening arrives the way it always does in ancient Greece, quietly at first, and then all at once, as if the city suddenly remembers it has been awake for too long. The sunlight that spent the entire day sitting proudly on rooftops and temple walls now begins slipping downward, turning stone into gold for a few brief moments before surrendering everything to softer colours. The courtyard around you has almost emptied completely. The voices are gone now. No merchants arguing about prices. No citizens insisting they have been terribly wronged by neighbours who, coincidentally, tell exactly the opposite story. No officials walking quickly while carrying expressions designed to suggest civilization itself rests on their shoulders. Only scattered footsteps remain, fading farther and farther into narrow streets. You finish placing the last wax tablets onto shelves and stand there for a moment with your hands resting against the wood. Strange how silence feels heavier after noise leaves. During the day your mind never notices it because sound fills every space. But now the absence itself feels present, almost like another person standing nearby. You step away from your work and begin walking home through streets that have transformed completely since morning. Ancient cities change personalities at night. During the day, everything feels public. Movement, trade, work, conversation. People pushing past each other toward destinations that always seem urgent. But evening belongs to smaller things. Lamps glow softly behind windows. The smell of bread and cooking fires drifts through cool air. Families gather in courtyards. Somewhere music rises briefly before disappearing again. Somewhere laughter escapes into the streets and vanishes around corners. The city exhales, and for the first time all day, you are not carrying responsibilities beneath your arm. No tablets, no names, no records, just yourself walking beneath darkening skies. At first the feeling seems light, comfortable even. Then something slightly uncomfortable arrives beneath it. Because when the work disappears and the voices disappear and the expectations disappear, there remains one question waiting patiently underneath everything else. Who exactly are you when nobody needs anything from you? During the day, the answer feels simple. You're useful. You remember things. You write things. You help maintain order. People arrive needing your attention and leave carrying solutions. Your purpose sits directly in front of you, carved into wax and arranged on shelves. But now evening has removed all of that and left only you walking alone with your own thoughts, which turns out to be surprisingly inconvenient. You pass small groups gathered outside homes, men speaking quietly about work, children chasing each other despite obvious instructions to stop running, elderly neighbours discussing matters they discussed yesterday and will almost certainly discuss tomorrow. Ordinary life unfolding in small pieces. You slow your steps slightly without realising it. Watching them creates a strange feeling in your chest. Not sadness exactly, not envy either. Something quieter than both, because all day you've spent time recording lives while rarely participating in one yourself. You've written names beside agreements, watched friendships rise and collapse, seen arguments begin and end, observed thousands of moments belonging to other people. But observation creates distance, and distance has a habit of growing when left alone too long. You suddenly remember something the older record keeper told you earlier. Watch long enough and everyone repeats themselves. At the time the thought felt clever. Now it feels different. Because maybe repetition isn't the tragedy you first imagined. Maybe repetition is comfort. People wake up, work, eat, laugh, worry, love, argue, sleep. Then somehow find reasons to do it all again tomorrow. Entire lives built from ordinary moments repeated carefully over time. Maybe meaning never arrives dramatically. Maybe it accumulates quietly like water filling a basin one drop at a time. You continue walking while stars slowly appear overhead.